When 17-year-old Kira Volkov announced she was taking control of the crashing plane, air traffic controllers froze. They recognized her last name, the daughter of a murdered legend. Both pilots unconscious. Mountains appearing through fog with zero warning. 186 passengers flying blind toward granite walls. Only a teenage girl stood between them and death. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Her name was Kira Volkov, and she was 17 years old. She sat in seat 9C on Alaska Airlines Flight 318, watching the other passengers settle in for the short flight from Fairbanks to Anchorage. The Boeing 737-700 was almost full, 186 passengers and crew. The tourist couple next to her in seats 9A and 9B kept taking selfies with the mountains outside the window. They smiled and laughed, adjusting angles to capture the perfect shot of the Alaska Range stretching endlessly across the horizon. They were completely unaware of the thin girl in worn work clothes sitting beside them in the aisle seat. Kira wore faded Carhartt work pants that had seen countless days in airplane hangars and on remote airstrips. Her flannel shirt was soft from years of washing, the red and black pattern faded to muted colors. On her feet were scuffed Stratif boots, the rubber boots that every serious Alaskan wore, whether they were fishermen, hunters, or pilots. Her pale blonde hair was pulled back in a tight braid that hung down her back. Her ice blue eyes moved constantly, watching everything, missing nothing. She had the kind of awareness that came from years of flying alone in conditions where a single mistake meant death. To most people looking at her, she looked like just another teenager. Maybe a bit rough around the edges. Maybe someone who worked on a fishing boat during the summer or helped out at a remote hunting lodge. Just another kid from rural Alaska, heading to the city for some reason. But Kira Volkov was not just another teenager. At her high school in Fairbanks, the other students called her the weird Russian girl. She had 47 absences this semester alone, and it was only February. Her teachers had given up trying to get her to attend regularly. They sent letters home that nobody read. They scheduled meetings that nobody attended. They didn't understand why this clearly intelligent girl kept skipping class. Her test scores were excellent when she bothered to show up, but her attendance was abysmal. They didn't know that on those absent days, Kira was flying. While other kids her age were sitting in classrooms learning algebra and American history, Kira was piloting small aircraft through mountain passes in blizzard conditions. While they were at football games and school dances, she was landing on frozen lakes and glacier fields that didn't appear on any aviation chart. While they were worried about college applications and prom dates, she was maintaining flight logs and studying weather patterns and memorizing terrain features that could kill you if you didn't respect them. In the small, tight-knit community of bush pilots scattered across Alaska's frozen wilderness, she had a different name. They called her Little Wolf. She was the daughter of Victor Ice Wolf Volkov, the most legendary bush pilot Alaska had ever seen. Victor could land a small plane on a glacier in the middle of a snowstorm when visibility was measured in feet instead of miles. He could fly through mountain passes when you couldn't see 10 feet in front of you, navigating purely by instinct and feel. He could read weather patterns that other pilots couldn't even detect. He navigated using wind patterns and the sound of his engine and instincts that seemed almost supernatural to those who flew with him. In 23 years of flying in Alaska's most dangerous conditions, he never had a single accident. Not one. Not even a minor incident. Until 5 years ago. 5 years ago, when Kira was just 12 years old, Victor's plane exploded in mid-flight over the Alaska Range. He died instantly, along with 3 passengers he was transporting. The National Transportation Safety Board sent investigators. They examined the wreckage. They interviewed witnesses. They analyzed every piece of evidence they could find. After 3 months of investigation, they declared it a tragic accident. Catastrophic engine failure due to metal fatigue, they said. These things happened in old bush planes that flew in harsh conditions. No evidence of foul play. Case closed. But 12-year-old Kira knew better. She had found her father's logbook. She had read his final entry. And she knew that her father had been murdered. Kira closed her eyes and let the memory wash over her. She could still see it clearly, as if it had happened yesterday instead of 5 years ago. It was a Sunday afternoon in winter. The temperature was 40 degrees below zero, not unusual for interior Alaska in January. The sky was that particular shade of pale blue that only happened in extreme cold, when the air was so dry and clear that it seemed to sparkle. Kira had been sitting at the kitchen table in their small cabin outside Fairbanks, doing homework. Her father came in from the hangar, his breath creating clouds of vapor in the frigid air. He was wearing his old leather flight jacket, the one he brought with him from Russia 20 years earlier. His face was weathered from years of flying in harsh conditions, lines etched deep around his eyes from squinting at horizons and instrument panels. "Kirusha," he said, using his nickname for her. "Put on warm clothes. Today we fly." She looked up from her math book. "Papa, I have school tomorrow. I have a test." "School teach you nothing important," Victor said in his thick Russian accent. "I teach you how to survive. How to read sky. How to feel wind. How to respect mountain. School cannot teach this." 20 minutes later, they were in the air. Victor's plane was a beat-up Cessna 206 that he'd owned for 15 years. It was equipped with skis for landing on snow and ice. The exterior was weathered and dinged from countless landings on rough terrain. But the engine was meticulously maintained, and the controls were precise. Victor might not have cared what his plane looked like, but he cared deeply about how it performed. They flew north from Fairbanks, heading toward the Brooks Range. The landscape below was an endless expanse of white, snow-covered tundra broken only by dark lines of rivers and the occasional cluster of spruce trees. "Kira, you see mountain ahead?" Victor asked. Kira looked through the windscreen at the wall of white clouds blocking their path. "No, Papa. Just clouds." "Good. That mean mountain hiding in cloud. But mountain still there. Mountain always there. Cloud come and go. Mountain stay forever." He reached over and, to Kira's surprise, started covering the instrument panel with pieces of duct tape. He covered the altimeter, the artificial horizon, the heading indicator, all the instruments that pilots relied on to fly when they couldn't see outside. "Papa, what are you doing?" Kira asked, alarmed. "In Alaska, we no have luxury of clear sky every day," Victor said calmly. "We have snow. We have ice. We have cloud. We have wind that try to kill you. So we learn to fly with feel, not with eyes. Not with instruments. With feel." He pointed at the windscreen, which was completely white with blowing snow and clouds. "Now. Tell me where mountain is." Kira stared at the blank whiteness ahead. "I can't see anything. I no ask you to see. I ask you to feel. Close eyes. Feel plane. Feel wind. Feel everything." Kira closed her eyes. At first, she felt nothing but fear and the vibration of the engine. But Victor was patient. He waited. Slowly, Kira started to notice things. The plane bounced slightly, not random turbulence, but a pattern. The left wing dipped just a little, then returned to level. A few seconds later, it dipped again. The wind was pushing from one direction, hitting something, then flowing around and creating these small disturbances. "The wind is coming from the left," she said slowly, concentrating. "But it's not steady. It's bouncing. Like it's hitting something and deflecting. The mountain must be at our 10 o'clock position. Maybe, 2 miles away." When she opened her eyes, Victor was smiling. It was rare to see her father smile. He was a serious man, shaped by a hard life in Russia before emigrating to Alaska, then shaped further by years of dangerous flying. Exactly right," he said proudly. "Mountain at 10 o'clock, 1.8 miles. You have gift, Kirusha. Same gift as your papa. You can feel the sky." From that day forward, Victor's training became more intense. He took Kira flying every chance he could. He taught her things that would have terrified other parents. He showed her how to land on surfaces that weren't on any map, frozen rivers that only existed for a few months each year, glacier fields that shifted and changed, gravel bars that appeared and disappeared with the seasons. He taught her to fly in conditions that grounded experienced pilots. Whiteout conditions where the ground and sky merged into one seamless sheet of white and you couldn't tell which way was up. High winds that could flip a small plane if you didn't approach the landing correctly. Turbulence so severe it felt like the plane was going to shake apart. But most importantly, he taught her the secret routes. The Ice Wolf Corridors, he called them. These were routes through the Alaska Range that didn't appear on any official aviation chart. Gaps between mountains that looked too narrow on radar but were actually wide enough if you knew exactly where to fly. Valleys that twisted and turned in ways that made them invisible to normal navigation but were perfectly safe if you knew the landmarks. Passes that could only be flown in certain wind conditions but provided shortcuts that saved hours of flying time. Victor had discovered these routes over 23 years of flying in Alaska. He had found them through careful exploration, through trial and error, through countless hours of studying the terrain from the air and from the ground. He had mapped them in his own way, using landmarks and descriptions that only made sense to someone who had flown them. These routes are Volkov family's secret, he told Kira one day when she was 14. I teach no other pilot. Only you. When I am gone, you keep them alive. You teach your children someday. Ice Wolf routes stay in Ice Wolf family. Duh, Papa, Kira had agreed. She had no idea how soon, when I am gone, would come. The memory of her father's last day was burned into Kira's mind with perfect clarity. It was a Tuesday in March, 5 years ago. Victor came home in the afternoon with news. He had been hired for a special flight. Good money, $5,000 for a 3-hour flight from a remote mining camp to Anchorage. Just transport 3 passengers. Simple job. But something about the job bothered him. Kira could see it in his eyes, in the way he moved around the cabin that evening with unusual tension. That night, after Kira went to bed, Victor stayed up late in the kitchen. She could hear him writing, the scratch of pen on paper. Around midnight, she got up to get water and saw him hunched over his logbook. She didn't disturb him. She just got her water and went back to bed. The next morning, Victor was already gone when she woke up. He had left early to fly to the mining camp to pick up his passengers. He'd left a note on the kitchen table, gone flying. Back tonight. Love, Papa. That afternoon, Kira was at school when the principal came to get her out of class. The principal's face was gray. 2 state troopers were waiting in the office. Victor's plane had exploded mid-flight. No survivors. The wreckage was scattered across 3 square miles of wilderness. For 3 months, Kira lived with a neighbor family while the NTSB investigation continued. She was in shock, moving through the days like a ghost. She couldn't believe her father was gone. Viktor Volkov, who could fly through anything, survive anything, who had never had an accident in 23 years, dead in a plane crash. It didn't make sense. When the investigation concluded and she was allowed back into the cabin, Kira went straight to her father's logbook. She found it in his office, still open to the last page he'd written on. The final entry was dated the night before the crash. Special flight tomorrow. 3 passengers from North Star mining camp to Anchorage. Federal witnesses in corruption case. They offered too much money for simple flight. I smell trap. Checked plane twice today. Fuel lines look wrong, possible cut. Oxygen system valve feels loose, tampered. They know what I'm carrying. They know I cannot be bought or scared. If I don't make it back, coordinates in usual place. Kirusha will know. V. Kira read it 3 times, her hands shaking. Then she tore the cabin apart searching for the usual place. She found it an hour later. Under the floorboards near the wood stove, there was a space where Victor had hidden a waterproof notebook. Inside were pages and pages of coordinates. Latitude and longitude numbers written in Victor's careful handwriting. Mountain pass names that didn't exist on official maps. Routes through terrain that aviation charts said was impossible to fly through. Detailed descriptions of landmarks, a particular rock formation, a distinctive grove of trees, a creek that flowed in a specific pattern. These were the Ice Wolf corridors. Her father's secret routes through the Alaska Range. And on the last page, a note written in Russian. If they kill me, these routes are yours now. Teach no one. Trust no one. Ice Wolf routes die with Ice Wolf family. They killed me because I would not be bought. They killed me because I saw what they did. They killed me because I carried witnesses who would expose them. Do not try to get revenge. Just fly. Keep the routes alive. Keep my memory alive in the sky. Love forever, Papa. Kira had sat on the floor of that cold cabin and cried for the first time since hearing the news. She cried for hours, until she had no tears left. Then she made a decision. She would not try to get revenge. Not yet. She was only 12 years old. Who would believe her accusations against a billion-dollar mining corporation? But she would keep the routes alive. She would learn every single one of her father's secret corridors. She would become the pilot he had trained her to be. And someday, when she was old enough, when people would listen to her, she would tell the truth about what happened to Viktor Volkov. For the next 5 years, Kira dedicated herself to flying. She lived alone in the cabin outside Fairbanks. Legally, she should have been in foster care, but she hid from social services. She was resourceful and independent, skills her father had taught her. She hunted and fished for food. She chopped wood to heat the cabin. She maintained her father's plane, which had been left to her in his will. And she flew. By age 13, she had logged 300 hours of flight time, all in Alaska bush operations. Small planes. Terrible weather. Impossible landings. She flew routes that experienced pilots wouldn't attempt. She landed on terrain that didn't appear on any chart. By age 15, she had 500 hours. She could land a ski-equipped plane on glacier fields that existed only in Victor's notebook. She could navigate through mountain passes in whiteout conditions, using only the techniques her father had taught her, feeling wind deflections, listening to engine sounds change as air density shifted near rock faces, sensing the presence of terrain she couldn't see. By age 16, she had 700 hours. The bush pilot community had started to hear about her. Stories circulated in the small airports and landing strips across Alaska. There was a girl, they said, who flew like Ice Wolf. Who knew routes nobody else knew. Who could land anywhere, in any conditions. Some pilots sought her out, wanting to learn from her. She turned them all away. The Ice Wolf routes were family secrets. Now, at 17, she had 847 hours logged. Every single hour was in bush operations. Small planes. Brutal weather. Remote wilderness. She had never flown anything bigger than a single-engine Cessna. She had never filed an official flight plan. She had never gotten a commercial pilot's license, though she had the skills and experience to pass the test easily. She flew off the grid, just like her father had taught her. She took cash payment from hunters and researchers who needed transport to remote areas. She guided fishing parties to secret lakes. She delivered supplies to isolated cabins. She did search and rescue flights when the weather was too bad for official rescue services to fly. And always, she practiced her father's routes. Once a month, she would fly the Ice Wolf corridors through the Alaska Range. She memorized every landmark, every wind pattern, every hidden obstacle. She refined her understanding of each route, adding her own notes to her father's notebook. The routes became part of her. She could fly them with her eyes closed. She knew them better than she knew the streets of Fairbanks. She had kept her promise to her father. The Ice Wolf routes lived on. But she had also made plans for revenge. 3 months ago, Kira had turned 17. Old enough, she decided, to be taken seriously. She hired a lawyer in Anchorage using money she'd saved from flying jobs. She told the lawyer everything, about the logbook entry, about the suspected sabotage, about the federal witnesses her father had been transporting. The lawyer was skeptical at first. But Kira was persuasive. She showed him the evidence. She explained the timeline. She pointed out that the NTSB investigation had been cursory at best, closing the case in just 3 months when complex accident investigations usually took a year or more. Finally, the lawyer agreed to help. He filed a motion to reopen the investigation into Viktor Volkov's death. He contacted the FBI about possible corporate murder. He arranged for Kira to give a deposition to federal prosecutors. That deposition was scheduled for tomorrow, in Anchorage. Which was why Kira was on Alaska Airlines Flight 318 today. She was finally going to tell the truth about what happened to her father. She was finally going to accuse North Star Mining Corporation of murder. She had no idea that North Star Mining was about to try to kill her too. Alaska Airlines Flight 318 had been in the air for 35 minutes. They had reached their cruising altitude of 22,000 feet and were flying southwest over the Alaska Range. The seatbelt sign had been turned off. Flight attendants were moving through the cabin with the beverage cart. Outside Kira's window, there was nothing but white clouds. The mountains were hidden somewhere in that whiteness, invisible but present. Kira knew they were out there. Mount McKinley, Denali, was somewhere to the west. Mount Foraker and Mount Hunter were to the south. Thousands of feet of granite and ice, capable of tearing an aircraft apart if you flew into them. Kira was reviewing her notes for tomorrow's deposition, reading through the timeline she'd prepared, when she noticed something strange. A smell. It was very faint. Sweet, almost like cherries. Most people wouldn't have noticed it at all. But Victor had trained Kira to notice everything, especially when flying. Every sound. Every smell. Every sensation. Because in Alaska bush flying, small details could save your life. That smell. Kira recognized it. Carbon monoxide. Most people thought carbon monoxide was completely odorless. And pure carbon monoxide was. But when it mixed with engine exhaust, some people could detect a faint sweet smell. Victor had taught her this. He'd made her smell exhaust intentionally so she'd recognize it if it ever leaked into a cockpit. Kira sat up straight, suddenly alert. Her heart rate increased. Why would there be engine exhaust smell in the passenger cabin? Then the plane wobbled. Not the normal bouncing of turbulence. This was different. The plane dipped slightly to the left, then overcorrected to the right. These were poor control inputs. Someone in the cockpit wasn't flying smoothly. Other passengers noticed too. A few people looked around, confused but not yet alarmed. Then the intercom crackled to life. The captain's voice came through the speakers, but it sounded wrong. Slurred. Like he was drunk or extremely tired. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some, technical, please remain in your, The announcement cut off mid-sentence. The passenger cabin went silent. Now people looked worried. That announcement had not sounded normal. But Kira knew exactly what was happening. The pilots were being poisoned. Carbon monoxide was getting into the cockpit. They were experiencing hypoxia, oxygen deprivation. Their judgment was impaired. Their motor skills were failing. Within minutes, they would lose consciousness completely. And when that happened, this plane full of 186 people would fall out of the sky. Kira unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. The tourists next to her looked at her in surprise. "Miss, I think we're supposed to stay seated," the man in 9A said nervously. Kira ignored him. She pushed past them into the aisle and started running toward the front of the plane. A flight attendant, his name tag said Tom Rodriguez, immediately moved to intercept her. "Miss, you need to return to your seat. The seatbelt sign is. The pilots are hypoxic." Kira shouted. "Carbon monoxide poisoning. I can smell it in the air." They're losing consciousness. Tom's face went white. What? How do you? I'm a pilot. Kira said urgently. I've been flying bush planes for 5 years. I know what carbon monoxide smells like. The captain's announcement, did you hear how he sounded? Slurred speech, confusion, those are symptoms of hypoxia. If we don't help them right now, they're going to pass out and we're all going to die. Tom hesitated for only a second. He was trained for emergencies, and something in this girl's voice, her absolute certainty, made him believe her. He pulled out his emergency key and punched in a code for the cockpit door. The lock clicked open. If you're wrong about this, Tom started. I'm not wrong, Kira said, and pushed through the door. The scene inside the cockpit was worse than Kira had feared. Captain Robert Hayes, a veteran pilot with 26 years of flying experience and over 18,000 flight hours logged, was slumped forward in his seat. His head rested against the instrument panel. His arms hung limp at his sides. He was completely unconscious, his face pale and his lips slightly blue. First Officer Dana Mitchell, who had flown F-16 fighters in the Air Force before transitioning to commercial aviation, was still semi-conscious. But barely. She was trying to reach for something, the oxygen mask, Kira realized, but her movements were slow and uncoordinated. Her eyes were unfocused and glassy. As Kira watched, Dana's hand fell away from the oxygen mask compartment without managing to open it. Get help. Dana mumbled, her words slurred almost beyond recognition. Can't breathe, something wrong. Then her eyes rolled back and she collapsed sideways in her seat, unconscious. The cockpit was a nightmare of blinking lights and alarms. The autopilot was still engaged, but Kira could see on the primary flight display that the plane was in a shallow descent. The altitude indicator showed 21,400 feet. They were losing altitude slowly but steadily. And they were headed directly toward the Alaska Range. Toward Denali, the highest peak in North America. Toward thousands of feet of granite mountain that would tear this Boeing 737 apart like tissue paper. The terrain warning system had already started to sound, a computerized voice repeating urgently, terrain. Pull up. Terrain. Pull up. Kira didn't panic. 5 years of bush flying in Alaska's deadliest conditions had taught her that panic killed faster than any mechanical failure. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, stay calm, Kirusha. Calm thinking saves lives. Panic kills. She moved fast but deliberately. First, she grabbed Captain Hayes by the shoulders and pulled him back from the instrument panel. He was heavy, over 200 pounds of unconscious weight, but adrenaline gave her strength. She managed to haul him back into his seat and secure him with the shoulder harness. Then she turned to the oxygen mask compartment. She yanked it open and pulled out 2 masks. She forced one over Captain Hayes's face, making sure it was tight and secure. Then she did the same for First Officer Mitchell. The oxygen might revive them. It would take time, but it might work. But there wasn't time to wait. Kira looked at the pilot's seats, then looked at the windscreen showing nothing but white clouds ahead, then looked at the instruments showing terrain warnings and descent rate and a flight path that led directly into a mountain. She made a decision. She slid into Captain Hayes's seat, the left seat, the captain's position. It was way too big for her. The seat was positioned for a man over 6 feet tall and she was only 5'6". She had to adjust everything. She pulled the seat forward as far as it would go. She adjusted the rudder pedals. She moved the armrests. All the while, her eyes scanned the instruments. Altitude, 21,400 feet. Still descending at 300 feet per minute. Heading, 195 degrees. South-southwest. Directly toward Denali. Airspeed, 280 knots. Normal for cruise flight. Outside visibility, 0. Complete whiteout conditions. Clouds and snow and nothing else. The terrain warning continued, terrain. Pull up. Terrain. Pull up. Kira's hand reached for the radio controls. She had never used a radio in a commercial jet before, but the basics were the same as the radios in bush planes. She found the transmit button and keyed it. Her voice was steady, betraying none of the fear pounding in her chest. Anchorage approach, this is Alaska Airlines Flight 318. Both pilots are incapacitated. Passenger taking control. I'm rated for bush operations, 847 hours total time. I need immediate assistance. Static. Then a voice came back, shocked and disbelieving. Alaska 318, say again your last transmission. Did you say passenger taking control? Affirmative, Anchorage. I'm Kira Volkov. I'm a bush pilot. Both pilots are unconscious from what I believe is carbon monoxide poisoning. I have control of the aircraft, but I'm flying blind in instrument conditions over the Alaska range. I need vectors out of terrain immediately. There was a longer pause this time. Kira could imagine the chaos in the control tower. A passenger flying a commercial jet? A 17-year-old girl? It must sound insane. Then a different voice came through the radio. Older. Shaking slightly. Did you just say? Kira Volkov. Viktor Volkov's daughter. 150 miles south, in the Anchorage Air Traffic Control Tower, Controller James Mackenzie stared at his radar screen with his hand frozen over the radio microphone. He was 62 years old. He'd been an air traffic controller for 40 years. He'd handled thousands of emergency situations. Engine failures. Medical emergencies. Hydraulic problems. Weather diversions. He'd talked pilots through situations that should have killed everyone on board. But he'd never handled anything like this. A passenger flying a commercial jet. A teenager. Viktor Volkov's daughter. That's Ice Wolf's kid, Mac said to his supervisor, Carol Brennan, who was standing behind him. Viktor's daughter. The one he was training. She's only 17 years old. Carol stared at the radar screen showing Alaska 318's position relative to the terrain. A 17-year-old is flying a Boeing 737 with 186 people on board. She's not just any 17-year-old, Mac said. She's been flying bush planes since she was 12. Illegally, mostly, no license, no official flight plans. But Viktor trained her. I heard stories about her in the pilot community. They call her Little Wolf. She flies routes her father taught her. Routes nobody else knows. If anyone can fly through those mountains blind, it's a Volkov. Carol shook her head, her face pale. Mac, she's not rated for commercial jets. She's never flown anything bigger than a Cessna. She's a teenager flying a Boeing in zero visibility, heading straight for Denali. We need to scramble Air Force jets from Elmendorf, get her to turn around, get the passengers to evacuate. There's no ejection seat on a 737. Mac snapped. And you can't evacuate 186 passengers in mid-flight. They're at 21,000 feet. Even if they had parachutes, which they don't, they'd freeze to death or hit the mountains before they landed. He pointed at the radar screen. She's 18 miles from Denali's north face. In zero visibility. If we don't help her right now, everyone on that plane dies. She's our only option. Carol looked like she wanted to argue, but she couldn't. Mac was right. There were no other options. Mac took a deep breath and keyed the radio. Kira, this is Mac Mackenzie. I knew your father. Viktor and I flew together back in the 90s, before I became a controller. He was the best pilot I ever flew with. The best I ever saw. I'm going to get you through this, but I need you to trust me completely. Can you do that? Kira's voice came back small but fierce. I trust you, Mac. Tell me what to do. Mac felt something relax in his chest. That voice. That tone. She sounded so much like Viktor. Calm under pressure. Focused. Ready to do whatever it took. First, Kira, I need you to level off, Mac said. You're descending at 300 feet per minute. Disconnect the autopilot and pull back gently on the yoke until the vertical speed indicator shows 0. Can you do that? Stand by. Mac watched the radar. The altitude readout stopped decreasing. Started to increase slightly. Then leveled off. Level at 21,200 feet, Kira reported. Good. Perfect. Now I need you to tell me exactly what you can see. Nothing. Complete whiteout. Clouds and snow. I can't see any terrain references. Mac looked at the terrain display. Alaska 318 was in the worst possible position, flying directly toward Denali with 0 visibility. The mountains were completely hidden in clouds. Kira, I'm going to give you a heading that will take you away from the immediate terrain. I need you to turn left to heading 240 degrees. Acknowledge. Negative, Kira said. Mac blinked. What? Heading 240 takes me through the Ruth Glacier Pass, Kira said calmly. There's a granite cliff face on the east wall of that pass at 19,000 feet. It's nearly vertical, so it doesn't show up properly on radar. The official charts mark it as a possible hazard, but most pilots don't know exactly where it is because nobody flies that route. If I turn to 240, I'll be headed directly toward that cliff face. In 0 visibility, I'll fly straight into it. Mac pulled up the detailed terrain database and zoomed in on the Ruth Glacier area. He scanned the data. Checked the topographical overlay. She was right. There was a cliff face there. The database showed it as a steep terrain feature, but because it was nearly vertical, the radar cross-section was minimal. Most terrain warning systems wouldn't pick it up until you were dangerously close. How do you know that? Mac asked, his voice full of wonder. Because my father flew these mountains for 23 years, Kira said. He mapped every hidden obstacle, every wind pattern, every piece of terrain that the official charts don't show accurately. He taught me everything he knew. I've flown through these passes dozens of times. Mac looked at Carol. They both realized the same thing at the same moment. This girl knew terrain features that didn't exist in any official database. She had been trained by a legend who had flown routes that were never officially recorded. She had knowledge that couldn't be found in any chart or computer system. Kira, Mac said carefully, what heading do you think is safe? There was a pause. Mac could imagine her in the cockpit, sitting in a seat way too big for her, looking at instruments she'd never seen before, flying a plane 10 times larger than anything she'd ever touched, and yet somehow staying calm enough to think clearly. Turn right to heading 265, Kira said. Descend to 18,000 feet. That puts me in what my father called the Ice Wolf Corridor. The what? It's a route my father used when he needed to fly through the Alaska Range in bad weather or when he wanted to avoid radar detection. It threads between Mount Foraker and Mount Hunter. The official charts say it's impossible to fly through because the gap is too narrow, only about 4 miles wide at the narrowest point, with mountains rising over 14,000 feet on both sides. But it's not impossible. You just have to know exactly where to fly. My father flew it hundreds of times. I've flown it at least 20 times myself. Carol grabbed Mac's arm. Mac, that corridor doesn't exist in our charts. You're going to trust a teenager's memory of her dead father's illegal flight routes? Mac shook her off. He looked at the radar screen, at the blip representing Alaska 318, at the terrain surrounding it. He thought about Viktor Volkov. The Ice Wolf. The pilot who could fly through anything. The man who had saved lives by knowing routes nobody else knew. And he thought about Victor's daughter, 17 years old, sitting in a cockpit where she didn't belong, with 186 lives depending on her. He keyed the radio. Kira, turn right to heading 265. Descend to 18,000 feet. I'm with you. While Kira executed the turn, First Officer Dana Mitchell began to regain consciousness. The oxygen mask was working. The pure oxygen was flushing the carbon monoxide from her blood. What happened? Dana mumbled, her voice weak. Carbon monoxide poisoning, Kira said, not taking her eyes off the instruments. She was hand-flying now, the autopilot disconnected, making small precise inputs to keep the plane on course. Someone tampered with the oxygen bleed system. Same method they use. What happened? Dana mumbled, her voice weak. Carbon monoxide poisoning, Kira said, not taking her eyes off the instruments. She was hand-flying now, the autopilot disconnected, making small precise inputs to keep the plane on course. Someone tampered with the oxygen bleed system. Same method they use /parameter name equals new_str, while Kira executed the turn, First Officer Dana Mitchell began to regain consciousness. The oxygen mask was working. The pure oxygen was flushing the carbon monoxide from her blood, slowly reversing the effects of the poisoning. What happened? Dana mumbled weakly. Her vision was still blurry and her head pounded with a vicious headache. Carbon monoxide poisoning, Kira said, not taking her eyes off the instruments. She was hand-flying now, the autopilot disconnected, making small precise inputs to keep the plane on the heading Mac had approved. Someone tampered with the oxygen bleed system. Same method they used to kill my father 5 years ago. Dana tried to sit up straighter, but her muscles weren't responding properly yet. You think this was sabotage? I know it was, Kira said grimly. My father was transporting federal witnesses against North Star Mining Corporation when his plane exploded. The NTSB ruled it an accident, but I found his logbook. He suspected sabotage. He wrote about it the night before he died. And now I'm on my way to Anchorage to give a deposition accusing North Star of murdering him. This is another assassination attempt. Dana's eyes widened. She reached for her tablet computer, still mounted on a swing arm attached to the side of her seat. Her fingers fumbled with it, still clumsy from the effects of the poisoning, but she managed to pull up the passenger manifest. She scrolled through the list of names. Then she stopped, staring at the screen. Kira. Dana said slowly. There are 3 North Star Mining executives on this flight. In first class. Seats 2A, 2B, and 3A. Kira processed this information. Then they didn't know about the sabotage. Whoever did this didn't care about collateral damage. They were willing to kill their own executives, along with 183 other innocent people, just to make sure I never made it to that deposition. That's... Dana struggled for words. That's insane. That's murder on a massive scale. That's how much they have to lose, Kira said. If I testify, if the investigation into my father's death gets reopened, if people start looking into North Star's operations, the whole company could collapse. Criminal charges. Lawsuits. Billions of dollars. They've already killed 4 people to protect their secrets. What's 186 more? She keyed the radio again. Mac, when we land, if we land, you need to quarantine this aircraft immediately. The carbon monoxide source needs to be investigated as deliberate sabotage. This was an assassination attempt. The FBI needs to be notified. Nobody gets off this plane until they've been interviewed. Mac's voice came back, grim but professional, copied, Kira. I'm alerting the FBI and airport security now. And Kira, we're going to land. I promise you that. The autopilot couldn't fly the route Kira had in mind. The Ice Wolf corridor required hand flying, required feeling the plane, required instincts that couldn't be programmed into any computer. She wrapped her hands around the yoke, so much bigger and heavier than the yoke in her Cessna, and focused. Outside the windscreen, there was nothing but white. No ground. No sky. No mountains. No reference points whatsoever. Just endless white in every direction, clouds and snow blending into a uniform blank nothingness. They were flying through that whiteness at 18,000 feet with massive mountains somewhere nearby. Invisible mountains. Mountains that could kill them if Kira made a single mistake. She closed her eyes for a moment and let herself feel the plane. The Boeing 737 was so different from her Cessna. Bigger, heavier, faster. The controls were hydraulically assisted, so they felt different under her hands. The engines were turbofans instead of a single-piston engine, so the sound was different. Everything was different. But the principles were the same. The way wind affected an aircraft didn't change based on size. The way turbulence felt didn't change. The way air flowed around obstacles didn't change. Kira opened her eyes and flew. The plane shuddered. Just slightly. So subtle that most pilots probably wouldn't have noticed it. But Kira felt it through the yoke, through the rudder pedals, through the seat. The left wing had lifted a few inches. That's wind deflecting off Mount Foraker's west face, Kira said aloud. She was talking to herself, narrating what she felt, the way her father had taught her. I'm too close to the left wall of the corridor. Need to adjust right. She applied a gentle pressure to the yoke, banking the plane 2 degrees to the right. Just a tiny correction. In zero visibility, overcorrecting was as dangerous as not correcting at all. In the anchorage tower, Mac watched the radar display with his heart pounding. The little blip representing Alaska 318 was threading between 2 massive peaks. Mount Foraker rose to 17,400 feet on the left. Mount Hunter rose to 14,573 feet on the right. The gap between them at 18,000 feet was maybe 4 miles wide. 4 miles sounded like a lot. But at 260 knots, the speed Alaska 318 was flying, 4 miles was less than a minute. And in zero visibility, with no way to see the mountains, that 4-mile gap felt like threading a needle in the dark. She's doing it, Carol Brennan whispered, staring at the radar. She's actually doing it. Back in the cockpit, Kira felt another shudder. This time the right wing dropped slightly. Mount Hunter on the right, she said. I'm centered in the corridor now. Should be good for the next 6 miles. She checked the heading indicator. Still on 265 degrees. Perfect. She checked the altitude. 18,100 feet. A little high. She nudged the yoke forward slightly, letting the plane descend at a gentle 100 feet per minute. For the next 8 minutes, Kira flew entirely by feel. She felt wind patterns bouncing off invisible rock faces. She felt subtle changes in turbulence that told her when she was drifting too close to one side or the other. She felt the way the engine sounded different when air density changed near solid obstacles, a phenomenon her father had taught her about. Thin air near a rock face versus thicker air over empty space. The difference was tiny, but it was there if you knew how to listen. She flew with a precision that seemed impossible for someone who had never been in a 737 cockpit before this moment. But she wasn't flying a 737. Not really. She was flying the Ice Wolf Corridor. A route she knew better than she knew the streets of Fairbanks. A route her father had flown hundreds of times, that she had flown dozens of times. The plane was different, but the route was the same. The mountains were the same. The wind patterns were the same. And the Volkov instinct was the same. Papa, she whispered, so quietly that nobody else could hear. If you're watching me from wherever you are, help me fly. Help me get these people home. Help me finish what you started. At 12,000 feet, after 8 minutes of flying blind through the most dangerous terrain in North America, the plane broke through the bottom of the clouds. Visibility returned. Kira looked down and saw the Susitna Valley spread out below her. Green and brown terrain. Rivers. Lakes. And in the distance, she could see Cook Inlet and the city of Anchorage. I'm clear of terrain, she shouted into the radio, her voice cracking with relief. I can see the ground. We made it through. In the Anchorage tower, Mac exhaled for the first time in 8 minutes. His hands were shaking. He'd been holding his breath without realizing it. Kira Volkov, he said into the radio, his voice thick with emotion. You just flew the Ice Wolf Corridor. In a commercial jet. In zero visibility. Your father would be so incredibly proud of you. Carol Brennan put her hand on Mac's shoulder. She had tears in her eyes. That was the most amazing piece of flying I've ever seen. And I've been doing this job for 30 years. Other controllers in the tower were standing now, applauding. They'd all been watching Alaska 318 thread through the mountains. They'd all been holding their breath, expecting disaster. They'd all just witnessed something that should have been impossible. A 17-year-old girl with no jet training had just flown a Boeing 737 through terrain that would challenge an experienced pilot even in perfect weather. She had done it in zero visibility. Using knowledge passed down from her father. Using routes that existed nowhere except in the memories of the Volkov family. The Ice Wolf lived. Captain Robert Hayes slowly regained consciousness. The oxygen mask had done its job. His head felt like it had been split open with an axe, and his muscles were weak, but he was awake and aware. Who's flying?" he mumbled, his tongue thick in his mouth. "Kira Volkov, sir," she said from the left seat. "You and First Officer Mitchell were poisoned by carbon monoxide. You've been unconscious for about 15 minutes. I've been flying the aircraft. We're currently clear of terrain and approaching Anchorage. Altitude 12,000 feet, heading 265 degrees, airspeed 240 knots." Hayes turned his head, it took immense effort, and looked at the person sitting in his seat. A teenage girl. Blonde hair in a braid. Work clothes. Sitting in a captain's seat that was clearly way too big for her. Then he looked at the instrument panel. At the altitude and heading she'd reported. At the flight path displayed on the navigation screen. At the terrain display showing the Alaska Range behind them. You flew through the Denali Range?" he asked, his voice full of disbelief. "In zero visibility?" "Yes, sir. I used a route my father taught me. The Ice Wolf Corridor." Hayes's eyes widened. Even through the fog of carbon monoxide poisoning, that name registered. Every Alaska pilot knew about the Ice Wolf. Victor Volkov was a legend. "You're Victor's daughter," Hayes said. "Yes, sir." Hayes tried to sit up straighter, but his body wouldn't cooperate. His arms felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. His fingers couldn't grip anything. "I can't fly yet. The poisoning. I'm too weak." "Dana?" Dana Mitchell shook her head from the right seat. "I'm conscious, Captain, but I can't coordinate my movements properly. I tried to reach for the controls and my hand missed by 6 inches. I'm in no condition to fly." Hayes looked at Kira with a growing sense of dread. "Have you ever landed a jet aircraft?" "No, sir. The biggest plane I've ever flown is a Cessna 206 on skis. Total weight about 3,600 pounds. This Boeing weighs, what? About 70,000 pounds empty." "About that," Hayes confirmed. "But we've got fuel and passengers, so we're closer to 130,000 pounds right now." Kira absorbed this. The plane she was flying weighed 36 times more than the heaviest plane she'd ever touched. "Can you do this?" Hayes asked. His life, Dana's life, and the lives of 184 passengers and crew depended on the answer. Kira thought of her father. She thought of all those hours flying in conditions that terrified other pilots. She thought of all those impossible landings on terrain that shouldn't have been landable. She thought of Victor's voice, "Stay calm, Kirusha. You can do anything if you stay calm and think clearly." "I have to," Kira said. "So I will." The Anchorage Tower cleared all other traffic. Every plane in the area was diverted to other airports or told to hold position at altitude. Fire trucks and ambulances lined up along runway 7L, the longest runway at Anchorage, over 10,000 feet of concrete. Emergency equipment stood ready. The airport authority had activated their disaster response plan. "Alaska 318, this is Anchorage Tower," Max said. "You are cleared to land on runway 7L. Wind is calm. Visibility is 10 miles. Emergency equipment is standing by. You can do this, Kira." "Copy, Anchorage," Kira said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were sweating on the yoke. Mac began talking her through the approach, step by step. Captain Hayes, still weak but conscious, helped from the right seat, telling Kira which controls to use and when. "Kira, you're currently at 12,000 feet, Mac said. I need you to descend to 5,000 feet. Reduce throttle slightly and push the yoke forward gently. Aim for a descent rate of about 1,000 feet per minute." Kira did as instructed. The plane's nose dipped. The altimeter began unwinding. Outside, the ground grew closer. "Good," Mac said. "You're doing great. Now, at 5,000 feet, I need you to begin slowing down. Your current airspeed is 240 knots. For landing, we need to be at about 140 knots. Start reducing throttle." Kira pulled the throttle levers back. The engine sound decreased. The plane began to slow. "At 3,000 feet, you need to extend the landing gear," Mac continued. "There's a lever to your right, shaped like a wheel. Pull it down." Kira found the landing gear lever. She pulled it down. There was a loud mechanical sound as the gear doors opened and the wheels extended into the slipstream. 3 green lights illuminated on the panel. "Gear down and locked," Kira reported. 3 green lights. "Perfect," Mac said. "Now we need to configure the flaps. Flaps slow the plane down and increase lift at low speeds. There's a lever near the throttles with positions marked. Move it to the position marked 15. Kira moved the flap lever. She felt the plane change its attitude as the flaps extended from the trailing edges of the wings. The nose pitched down slightly. The plane slowed further. "Flaps 15, she reported. "Excellent. You're at 2,000 feet now. Line up with the runway. You should be able to see it ahead of you." Kira looked through the windscreen. There it was, a long strip of gray concrete stretching into the distance. It looked impossibly narrow. How was she supposed to land this huge plane on something that looked like a ribbon? "I see the runway," Kira said. "Adjust your heading to line up with the centerline," Mac instructed. "Small corrections. Don't overcorrect." Kira made tiny adjustments with the yoke, nudging the plane left and right until the runway was centered in the windscreen. "At 1,000 feet, I need you to extend flaps to 30 degrees, Mac said. Move the lever to position 30. Kira moved the lever. More mechanical sounds. The plane slowed even more, settling into a nose-down attitude. "Airspeed 150 knots, Kira reported. "Good. Now, this is the critical part. At 500 feet, you're going to start reducing power. At 200 feet, you're going to start pulling back on the yoke. This is called the flare. You want to raise the nose gradually so that the main wheels touch first, not the nose wheel. Think of it like landing your Cessna on skis. Same principle, just bigger and heavier." At 500 feet, Kira could see individual lights along the runway. She could see the fire trucks parked alongside. She could see the terminal in the distance. She reduced power further. At 200 feet, start your flare, Kira. Pull back gently on the yoke. Kira pulled back. The nose rose. The plane seemed to float for a moment. At 100 feet, Mac's voice, a little more. Keep pulling back. You're looking good. Kira pulled back more. Her hands were shaking now, but she kept them steady on the yoke. At 50 feet, hold it, hold it. At 20 feet, perfect. Let it settle. The main wheels touched the runway with a solid thump. Not graceful, but controlled. The plane bounced slightly, then settled again. Deploy thrust reversers. Captain Hayes shouted from beside her. Pull the throttle levers up and back. Kira found the thrust reverser levers, they were integrated with the throttles, and pulled them up and back. The sound of the engines changed dramatically as the thrust was reversed. The plane shook with the force of the deceleration. She applied the brakes, gently at first, then harder. The plane slowed. And slowed. And finally stopped, still on the runway, about 6,000 feet from where the wheels first touched. 186 passengers and crew. All alive. Alaska 318 was down. For a long moment, there was complete silence in the cockpit. Kira sat in the captain's seat, her hands still gripping the yoke, breathing hard. She couldn't quite believe it was over. They were on the ground. They were safe. Then she heard something from the passenger cabin behind her. Applause. It started slowly, then built to a roar. Passengers were clapping, cheering, crying. Some were hugging each other. Others were calling loved ones on their phones, crying as they said, "I'm alive, I'm okay, I'm safe." Tom Rodriguez, the flight attendant, appeared in the cockpit doorway. He had tears streaming down his face. "You did it," he said to Kira. "You actually did it. You saved us all." Captain Hayes reached over with a shaking hand and put it on Kira's shoulder. "That was the most remarkable piece of flying I have ever witnessed in 26 years of aviation. You saved my life. You saved everyone on this aircraft." Dana Mitchell added, "I've flown combat missions in F-16s. I've done carrier landings on aircraft carriers in bad weather. And I have never, ever seen flying like that. You're a natural, Kira. A genuine prodigy." Kira couldn't respond. The adrenaline was wearing off and the reality was setting in. She had just landed a commercial jet with no training. She had flown through mountains in zero visibility. She had saved 186 people. And she was 17 years old. She started shaking uncontrollably. "Get her some water," Hayes said to Tom. "And a blanket. She's going into shock." Emergency vehicles surrounded the plane. Fire trucks, ambulances, FBI vehicles, airport security. The stairs were rolled up to the forward door. When the door opened, paramedics rushed in to check on the pilots. FBI agents came aboard to secure the scene. Airport officials wanted statements. The media was already gathering beyond the security perimeter, cameras ready. But first, before any of that, Kira saw Mac McKenzie running across the tarmac. He was older than she'd imagined from his voice. Probably in his 60s, with gray hair and a weathered face. But his eyes were kind, and when he looked at Kira, she saw tears. He climbed the stairs and entered the plane. He walked straight to Kira and hugged her. "Your father just saved 186 people through you," Mac said, his voice breaking. "The Ice Wolf flew today. Through you. His routes, his knowledge, his training, it all came alive again. Victor's legacy lives on, Kira. He would be so proud." That was when Kira finally broke down. For the first time in 5 years, since the day she learned her father was dead, she cried. Not quiet tears, but deep, racking sobs. All the grief she'd been holding inside. All the fear from the flight. All the relief that they were alive. All of it came pouring out. Mac held her and let her cry. "You did good, little wolf," he said softly. "You did so good." Within 2 hours of landing, the NTSB had investigators on site. They immediately quarantined Alaska 318, allowing no one to touch anything until it had been thoroughly examined. What they found confirmed Kira's suspicions. The aircraft's oxygen bleed system, which took bleed air from the engines and pressurized it for the cabin and cockpit, had been sabotaged. Someone had installed a modified valve that allowed exhaust gases to mix with the pressurized air going to the cockpit. Carbon monoxide from the engines had been slowly poisoning the pilots since takeoff. The modification was sophisticated. It wasn't something a casual vandal could do. It required detailed knowledge of the 737 systems. It required access to the aircraft during maintenance. It required intent to kill. Security footage from Fairbanks Airport showed the sabotage being performed. A maintenance contractor, working during an overnight check, had accessed the oxygen system. The contractor worked for Arctic Aviation Services, a company owned by Northern Industrial Holdings, which was a subsidiary of North Star Mining Corporation. The same corporation Kira was scheduled to testify against. The same corporation her father had accused of sabotage 5 years ago. The FBI moved quickly. Within 24 hours. The maintenance contractor was arrested attempting to flee to Canada. The CEO of North Star Mining Corporation was arrested at his home in Anchorage. 7 company executives were arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit murder. Viktor Volkov's death was officially reclassified from accident to homicide, and the case was reopened. The contractor talked immediately, probably hoping for a plea deal. He admitted he'd been paid $50,000 to sabotage Alaska 318. He admitted he'd done a similar job 5 years ago on a Cessna 206, Viktor Volkov's plane. He provided emails, money transfers, and recorded phone calls. The evidence was overwhelming. North Star Mining Corporation had murdered 4 people 5 years ago, Viktor and 3 federal witnesses, to prevent testimony about environmental corruption. And they had tried to murder 186 people to prevent Kira from testifying about that original murder. The story exploded across national and international media. Teenage girl saves 186 after pilots poisoned. Ice Wolf's daughter lands jet in zero visibility. Corporate murder plot foiled by 17-year-old bush pilot. Kira's life changed overnight. 3 days after the emergency landing, Kira sat at a press conference in Anchorage. The room was packed with reporters, cameras, and microphones. She wore her father's old leather flight jacket, the one he'd brought from Russia. It was too big for her, drowning her thin frame, but she didn't care. It made her feel close to him. A reporter from CNN asked, "Kira, how did you stay calm when both pilots were unconscious and the plane was headed toward a mountain?" Kira thought about the question. "Because my father taught me that panic kills you in Alaska. When you're flying bush planes in bad weather, if you panic, you make mistakes. And mistakes kill you. Calm thinking, feeling the plane, trusting your training, that's what keeps you alive. So when I saw the pilots were unconscious, I didn't let myself panic. I just did what my father trained me to do. I flew the plane." Another reporter, from the New York Times, "You flew through mountains in zero visibility. Experts are saying what you did was impossible. How did you do it?" "My father flew routes that aren't on official aviation charts," Kira explained. "Routes through the Alaska Range that most pilots don't know exist. Places where you navigate by wind patterns, by the feel of the air, by knowing the mountains like you know your own heartbeat. He passed those routes to me. He taught me how to fly them. Today, that knowledge saved 186 lives." A reporter from the Anchorage Daily News, "Will you become a commercial pilot? Airlines are already saying they want to hire you." Kira smiled, a real smile, the first since the crash. "No. I'm not interested in commercial aviation. I'm going back to bush flying. To Alaska. To the mountains my father loved. I'm going to keep the Ice Wolf routes alive, keep teaching others how to fly safely in Alaska's conditions. Because some knowledge is too important to die with the people who hold it. It has to be passed down." "What about college?" another reporter asked. "Maybe someday," Kira said. "But right now, flying is what I do. It's what I am. It's how I stay connected to my father's memory." An older reporter, from a Russian newspaper, asked in Russian, "Your father would be proud, yes?" Kira answered in Russian, the language of her childhood, "I hope so. Everything I did that day, I did because of what he taught me. He saved those people through me. His hands were on my hands. His voice was in my head. He's gone, but he's not really gone. He lives on every time I fly." The questions continued for an hour. Kira answered them all patiently, honestly. She didn't try to make herself sound heroic. She just told the truth. When it was finally over, Mac Mackenzie was waiting for her outside the conference room. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Tired," Kira admitted. "I just want to go home. Back to Fairbanks. Back to my cabin." "There's someone who wants to meet you first," Mac said. "If you're up for it." He led her to a small office. Inside were Captain Robert Hayes and First Officer Dana Mitchell, both looking much healthier than the last time Kira had seen them. "Kira," Captain Hayes said, standing up. "Dana and I wanted to thank you properly. You saved our lives. We would have died in that cockpit if you hadn't acted." "We've also been talking to Alaska Airlines," Dana added. "We told them what happened. All of it. How you identified the carbon monoxide poisoning. How you flew the Ice Wolf corridor. How you landed the plane. The company wants to do something for you." "I don't need anything," Kira said. "Nevertheless," Hayes said, "Alaska Airlines is establishing a scholarship in your father's name. The Viktor Volkov Memorial Scholarship for aspiring pilots from Alaska. Full ride to any flight school in the country. For students who want to learn bush flying, wilderness operations, the kind of flying your father was famous for." Kira felt tears welling up. "Really? Really," Dana confirmed. "Your father's knowledge, his techniques, his routes, they shouldn't die with him. This scholarship will help train the next generation of Alaska bush pilots. Pilots who can fly in impossible conditions. Pilots who can save lives. Pilots like Victor. Pilots like you." Kira couldn't speak. She just nodded, crying. "There's more," Hayes said gently. "The FAA is also awarding you an emergency exemption to your commercial pilot's license requirements. Normally you'd need to be 18 and pass extensive tests. But given what you did, landing a commercial jet with no training, in an emergency situation, with 0 fatalities or injuries, they're willing to fast-track your certification. If you want it." Kira didn't know what to say. "I'll think about it. Thank you." She left the office in a daze. So much had changed in just 3 days. Her father's murder was finally being investigated. The people responsible were being held accountable. Scholarships and awards and recognition. But none of it brought her father back. The frozen lake was 60 miles north of Fairbanks, in the exact same spot where Victor had taught Kira to fly 9 years ago. The temperature was 38 degrees below zero. The sky was that crystalline blue that only happened in extreme cold. The air was so still you could hear sounds from miles away. Kira, now 18 years old, sat in the right seat of a Cessna 206. She had bought the plane 6 months ago with money from a settlement with North Star Mining Corporation. It was the same model her father had flown, equipped with the same ski landing gear. She'd even had it painted in the same colors, white fuselage with red and blue stripes. In the left seat sat her 14-year-old cousin, Alexei Volkov. He had come from Russia to live with Kira after hearing about what had happened. He wanted to learn to fly, just like his uncle Victor. Just like his cousin Kira. "Alexei, you see mountain ahead?" Kira asked in slightly accented English, mimicking her father's speech patterns deliberately. Alexei looked out at the wall of white clouds. "No, cousin. Just clouds." "Good. That mean mountain hiding in cloud. But mountain still there. Mountain always there. Cloud come and go. Mountain stay forever." She reached over and started covering the instruments with pieces of duct tape, just as her father had done with her all those years ago. "In Alaska, we no have luxury of clear sky every day," she said. "We have snow. We have ice. We have cloud. We have wind that try to kill you. So we learn to fly with feel, not with eyes. With feel." Alexei's eyes widened. "You want me to fly blind?" "I want you to fly like a Volkov," Kira corrected. "Close eyes. Feel plane. Feel wind. Tell me where mountain is." For the next hour, she put Alexei through the same training Victor had given her. Teaching him to feel the plane, to read the wind, to sense obstacles he couldn't see. The boy was a natural, just like the rest of the Volkov family. It was in their blood, this ability to fly by instinct. When the lesson was over and they were back on the ground, Alexei asked, "Cousin Kira, will you teach me the Ice Wolf routes? The secret corridors through the mountains?" Kira considered this carefully. Her father had told her to teach no one. Trust no one. But times had changed. The secrets that had protected Victor had also isolated him, made him a target. If more pilots knew these routes, if the knowledge was spread instead of concentrated, maybe it would be safer. But then again, these routes were the Volkov family legacy. They were what made the Ice Wolf legendary. Someday, Kira said finally. When you're ready. When you've proven you can handle them. The Ice Wolf routes are not for beginners. They're for pilots who understand that the mountains deserve respect. That Alaska demands excellence. That flying here is not a game. Just like Uncle Victor taught you, Alexei said. Exactly like Uncle Victor taught me. She looked out at the mountains, the same peaks that had tried to kill her a year ago. The same peaks her father had loved and respected. The same peaks that had witnessed the Ice Wolf's legend. Papa, she said quietly in Russian, I'm keeping your promise. The routes live on. I'm teaching Alexei. I'm flying your corridors. I'm keeping your memory alive in the sky. I hope I'm making you proud. The wind picked up, blowing snow across the frozen lake in swirling patterns. And for just a moment, Kira could have sworn she heard her father's voice on that wind. You make me proud every day, Karusha. Every day you fly is a day I live again. The Ice Wolf never dies. He just changes form. He flies through different hands. But he always flies. Always. 5 years after Alaska Airlines Flight 318's emergency landing, Kira Volkov stood in front of a newly built hangar at Fairbanks International Airport. She was 22 years old now, a licensed commercial pilot with over 3,000 hours of flight time. She had her own company, her own fleet of planes, her own students. The sign above the hangar read, Ice Wolf Flight School, Advanced Bush Pilot Training. Inside the hangar were 5 aircraft, 3 Cessna 206s equipped for various Alaska conditions, 1 de Havilland Beaver for heavy cargo operations, and 1 Piper Super Cub for tight landing zones. All meticulously maintained. All ready for the harsh conditions of Alaska flying. Kira had 12 students currently enrolled. They came from all over the world, Alaska locals, pilots from the lower 48 states, even a few international students from Norway and New Zealand who wanted to learn how to fly in extreme conditions. She taught them everything Victor had taught her. How to land on glaciers. How to fly through whiteouts. How to navigate by feel when instruments failed. How to read weather patterns that meteorologists couldn't predict. How to respect the mountains. She never revealed the specific Ice Wolf corridors. Those remained within the Volkov family, herself and Alexei, who was now 19 and one of her best instructors. But she taught the techniques that made those corridors possible. The skills that allowed pilots to fly safely in conditions that would ground others. Her graduates went on to save lives across Alaska. They flew rescue missions in impossible weather. They delivered medicine to remote villages when no one else would fly. They searched for lost hikers when visibility was zero. They transported pregnant women to hospitals during blizzards. They evacuated injured miners from remote camps. The legend of the Ice Wolf didn't die when Victor's plane exploded. It multiplied. Every pilot Kira trained carried a piece of that legend with them. They flew with Victor's techniques. They approached Alaska with Victor's respect. They saved lives with Victor's knowledge. On clear nights in Alaska, bush pilots still tell stories about the Ice Wolf. But now the stories include his daughter. The 17-year-old girl who landed a 737 in zero visibility. Who flew the Ice Wolf corridor with 186 lives depending on her. Who honored her father's memory by passing his knowledge to the next generation. Some legends die with their creators. But some legends live on, growing stronger with each generation that carries them forward. Victor, Ice Wolf Volkov flew for 23 years without an accident. He mastered conditions that terrified other pilots. And when corrupt men killed him to protect their secrets, they thought they had silenced him forever. They were wrong. The Ice Wolf never stopped flying. He just flew through different hands. Through his daughter's hands first, saving 186 people and exposing corporate murder. Then through dozens of students' hands, saving countless more lives across Alaska's wilderness. Victor had told Kira, teach no one. Trust no one. But Kira understood what her father couldn't have known: some knowledge is too important to keep secret. Some skills are too valuable to die with one person. Some legends need to be shared to stay alive. So she taught. She trained. She passed the ice wolf's knowledge to anyone willing to learn, willing to respect the mountains, willing to understand that flying in Alaska wasn't about conquering the wilderness, it was about respecting it. On particularly cold, clear nights, Kira still flew the ice wolf corridors. Alone, in her Cessna, she threaded through the mountain passes her father had discovered. She felt his presence in the wind, heard his voice in the engine sounds, saw his hand guiding hers on the yoke. "You still with me, Papa?" she would ask the empty cockpit. And the wind would answer, swirling around her plane with familiar patterns. The ice wolf howled. And his daughter howled back. Forever flying. Forever free. Forever alive in the Alaska sky.